This is a $100 trillion note. In 2008, it often couldn't even buy you a loaf of bread. This isn't a movie prop, it's the result of hyperinflation, an economic disease where a nation's money becomes worthless, almost overnight. Today, we're looking at the most extreme currency collapses in history. We're going to find out how a nation's money can become worthless, and what happens to the people who are left holding the bag. At the heart of almost every one of these stories lies the same culprit, a government and its printing press. It usually starts with a government in an existential crisis. Maybe it's insurmountable war debts. Maybe it's political collapse. They can't fund themselves by taxing or borrowing, so they turn to the one tool they still control, creating money from thin air. They print money to pay their bills, but more money chasing the same amount of goods means one thing: prices go up. So the government has to print even more money just to cover its own rising costs. This ignites a death spiral. Citizens, realizing their cash will be worth less tomorrow, spend it the moment they get it. This velocity of money just fans the inflationary fire. Savings are obliterated. The entire concept of a stable economic future vanishes. First up, the one everyone's heard of, Germany's Weimar Republic in 1923. The seeds of this collapse were sown in the punitive terms of the Treaty of Versailles. Germany was not only assigned sole guilt for World War I, but was also handed an impossible reparations bill of 132 billion gold marks. To make matters worse, Germany was stripped of vital industrial regions, gutting its ability to generate the wealth needed to pay. The final trigger came in January 1923, when Germany inevitably defaulted on its payments. French and Belgian troops occupied the Ruhr, Germany's industrial core. The Weimar government's response was an act of political defiance. It called for passive resistance, a nationwide general strike, and they promised to continue paying the wages of all striking workers. With its industrial heartland paralyzed and generating no tax revenue, how did they pay them? They turned on the printing press. This decision to weaponize monetary policy to fund a political struggle with inflation turned an already severe problem into a full-blown catastrophe. Daily life descended into a surreal nightmare. The value of the papier mark evaporated so quickly that workers were often paid twice a day. Their families would wait at the factory gates with laundry baskets and wheelbarrows, not to carry goods, but to carry the cash. They would then rush immediately to the shops to buy anything of value before prices rose again, which often happened within hours. The absurdity was staggering. A loaf of bread that cost 160 marks in 1922 soared to 200 billion marks by late 1923. A single cup of coffee could double in price in the time it took you to drink it. This economic chaos shattered the social fabric. The middle class, the bedrock of the republic, saw its life savings, pensions, and insurance policies become utterly worthless. An entire generation's wealth was wiped out. Bartering replaced commerce. People traded a haircut for a few eggs or a pair of shoes for a shirt. So how did it end? In November 1923, the government introduced a radical monetary reform, the Rentenmark. One new Rentenmark was exchanged for 1 trillion of the old, worthless papier marks, instantly erasing 12 zeros. But here's the genius of it. The Rentenmark wasn't backed by gold. It was supposedly backed by a mortgage on all of Germany's agricultural and industrial property. In reality, this was a legal fiction. You couldn't walk into a bank and exchange your note for a piece of a factory, but it provided a tangible, believable story. After years of paper backed by nothing, the German people, desperate for stability, chose to believe in it. This collective act of faith, combined with the government's crucial decision to stop the printing presses, broke the hyperinflationary spiral. But as insane as Germany's wheelbarrow economy was, it was nothing compared to what happened in Hungary in 1946. This is the single worst hyperinflation in all of human history. If you're finding this history as wild as I am, do me a favor and hit that like button. And subscribe if you want more deep dives into these insane true stories. It really helps the channel. Now back to Hungary. If the Weimar collapse was a political disaster, Hungary's was the result of total state failure. The country emerged from World War II utterly devastated. An estimated 90% of its industrial capacity was destroyed. On top of this physical destruction came the crushing burden of Soviet occupation. Hungary was forced to pay massive war reparations to the Soviet Union. Furthermore, the occupying Soviet army systematically plundered what was left. Faced with a non-existent tax base, a shattered productive capacity, and immense liabilities, the post-war government had no conventional means of funding itself. Its only recourse was the printing press. The resulting numbers are so large they become meaningless. At its peak in July 1946, prices were doubling every 15 hours. The monthly inflation rate reached an astronomical 41.9 quadrillion %. That is a 4, a 1, and 15 zeros. The government was forced to issue banknotes of ever higher denominations, culminating in the 100 million B-Pengo note. B-Pengo was short for a billion pengo. This note was worth 100 quintillion pengo, a 1 with 20 zeros after it. It was the highest denomination banknote ever put into circulation, and it was completely worthless. In a desperate act, the government even introduced a parallel currency called the Adapengo, or tax pengo. Its value was adjusted daily to try and provide a stable unit, but the experiment was doomed. A unit of account cannot create value where none exists. Financial wizardry cannot solve a crisis of production. The final solution came on August 1st, 1946, with the introduction of a new currency, the forint. The conversion rate was set at 1 forint to 400 octillion pengo. It succeeded because it was accompanied by a strict halt to money printing and, crucially, was backed by the return of Hungary's national gold reserves. It needed a credible, tangible anchor to restore public faith. Those were post-war disasters. But what happens when a country does this to itself? In peacetime, welcome to Zimbabwe in 2008. Unlike Germany or Hungary, Zimbabwe's hyperinflation was a self-inflicted wound. Once known as the breadbasket of Africa, its decline began around 2000 with the government's fast-track land reform program. This policy involved the seizure of thousands of white-owned commercial farms. They were redistributed, frequently to political loyalists who lacked farming experience. The result was a catastrophic collapse in agricultural production, the very engine of the Zimbabwean economy. This destruction of the country's productive base led to severe food shortages, the loss of nearly all foreign currency earnings, and the decimation of the government's tax revenue. Faced with economic collapse and needing to fund a vast system of political patronage, President Robert Mugabe's government turned to the only tool it had left, the Reserve Bank's printing presses. Life in Zimbabwe during the peak in 2008 became a daily struggle defined by absurdity. At its worst, prices were doubling every 24.7 hours. The government issued the now infamous $100 trillion banknote, a note so worthless it often could not buy a loaf of bread. People tell stories of paying $150 billion for 3 eggs, or of buying 2 beers at a time at a bar because the price of the second would have doubled by the time you finished the first. The formal economy ceased to function. Supermarket shelves were bare. So how did this one end? The government didn't choose a new policy. The people forced its hand. The public simply refused to accept the Zimbabwean dollar. A thriving black market emerged where transactions were conducted in more stable foreign currencies, primarily the US dollar and the South African rand. The people of Zimbabwe had spontaneously dollarized the economy from the bottom up. By January 2009, the government had no choice but to bow to reality. It officially abandoned the Zimbabwean dollar and legalized the use of foreign currencies. It was a stark admission of failure and a complete surrender of monetary sovereignty, dictated not by policymakers, but by the survival instincts of the populace. This brings us to our final case. What happens when a country prints money specifically to fund a war? In the 1990s, as Yugoslavia tore itself apart, the new smaller state of Serbia and Montenegro was hit by a triple economic shock. It was burdened with financing wars in Croatia and Bosnia. It was crippled by severe United Nations sanctions, and it was saddled with a massive state bureaucracy. With its economy imploding, the government of Slobodan Milosevic turned to the printing press as a direct instrument of war finance. Over 80% of the state budget was directed towards the military and police, funded almost entirely with newly created unbacked dinars. The economic devastation of the civilian population was simply the price of the regime's military ambitions. At its peak in January 1994, the monthly inflation rate hit 313 million %. The government issued a 500 billion dinar banknote. But just like in Zimbabwe, the populace found its own solution. The German Deutsche Mark became the de facto currency. People would receive their salaries in worthless dinars and immediately race to black market street corners to exchange them for a few precious Deutsche Marks. Shops began pricing goods in points, which were pegged 1-to-1 with the mark. The chaos finally ended when the government formalized the choice the public had already made. A novi dinar, or new dinar, was introduced, and its value was pegged directly to the Deutsche Mark at a rate of 1-to-1. By effectively outsourcing its monetary policy to the famously stable German Bundesbank, the government was able to kill hyperinflation almost overnight. 4 countries, 4 different times, but the pathology of monetary death is always the same. First, a catastrophic loss of a nation's productive capacity. Second, an insolvent government that faces massive bills it cannot pay. Third, the universal fatal decision to turn to the printing press as the last resort. And finally, the utter collapse of public trust, the psychological tipping point after which the currency becomes worthless, no matter how many zeros are on the note. Beyond the mind-boggling statistics, the enduring legacy is the profound human cost. Hyperinflation systematically destroys the middle class. It vaporizes a lifetime of savings and shatters the social contract. It's a terrifying reminder that money, whether it's a piece of paper or a number on a screen, is only valuable because we all agree that it is. The currency itself is just a tool. The real foundation is trust, and when that trust vanishes, so does everything else. Subscribe for more.